Let's follow the money. Find out about it as we are joined now by Mike Ciandella, senior analyst for MRC Business. Mike, thanks for Skyping in from the nation's capital, and welcome to America's Forum.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
It's good to have you, sir. Yesterday's Washington Times, I believe the lead story in that publication, that George Soros is one of the money men, perhaps the principal money man behind Black Lives Matter. What have you guys found out?
You know, that story, I saw that story. It was really interesting and not surprising based on what we've been doing, unfortunately, because this is what Soros does. And this is part of what we look into, and especially what I look into at MRC Business, is following the money. And Soros creates these infrastructures. It's not just that he sees a political event that happens and he agrees with it, he invests in it. He's doing this long term. So he'll go and he'll invest in all these different think tanks, youth organizations, community organizations, and he builds this infrastructure. And then when something happens, like Ferguson or like these riots or like Occupy Wall Street, he did the same thing during Occupy Wall Street. The infrastructure is already in place, and his message goes out on its own. It's really, I mean, he's a kind of an evil guy, but he's brilliant in the way he does it.
Mike, do you think the events in Ferguson were staged by Soros?
I don't think they were staged by Soros. I don't think any of us have any way of telling that, whether or not they were. But I think he was definitely waiting for something to happen. I mean, just like with Occupy Wall Street, I don't know that he started the original protests, but his money had already funded an infrastructure so that when those protests started, he could capitalize on it and he could start putting his money to work.
It's interesting you mentioned the irony as we were watching the video of yesterday and what happened in Boston to stop traffic. When you mentioned the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations of a few years ago, the irony that here is a billionaire who I guess we could say has vertically integrated his notion of agitation and propaganda into the body politic, and yet the dominant media culture ignores it. Never the follow the money story that the research you're doing, what the Washington Times is doing, we don't see that on the pages of the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Alphabet networks, at least not very often, do we?
Oh, the double standard on the network, CNN, MSNBC, all the major papers, it's just ridiculous. If any conservative donated to a political cause or a PAC or something like that, it would be manipulating the political process and corruption. But you can have a billionaire like Soros, and he's not alone. There's Tom Steyer from California, Michael Bloomberg from New York. And they're donating all these money. They're creating these infrastructures. They're influencing not just the process on a political group standpoint, but with all these smaller community groups. And the media just completely ignore them. The media it's always the Kochs make a better boogeyman than Soros, I guess, as far as they're concerned.
Now, Mike, bottom line here, what do you think Soros' ultimate motive is behind funding these groups?
Well, he said what his ultimate motive is. The foundation that he funds all his money through is called the Open Society Foundation. And his goal that he's explicitly said, both spoken and in writing, is to create some sort of Marxist dystopian open society. It kind of sounds like an Orwellian state.
And the irony is, of course, this so-called open society has been closed off, at least through the indulgence of the dominant media culture, turning a blind eye to the money. Mike Ciandella, this is such an important story. We're going to ask you to stay with us through the break. When we come back, more of the funding of the left by George Soros and others, and the silence of leftists in the dominant media culture. That is still to come as we continue here on America's Forum for this Friday from Newsmax TV. So please stay with us. With Francesca Page, J.D. Hayworth back on America's Forum. Let's continue our conversation now with Mike Ciandella, the senior analyst for MRC Business. And Mike, we have established that George Soros is taking care of his business interests by getting involved in groups that at first blush would seem to be non-business oriented. Is Soros the master financier on the left?
He certainly seems like it. It seems like whenever there's a major political event or something that happens in the liberal political spectrum, if you trace the money back, and that's a lot of what I do for my job, is just follow the money back and see who's funding it. It seems like 9 out of 10 times it leads right back to Soros. And those Soros numbers are huge too. I mean, he's given more than $550 million to liberal causes just since 2000.
Mike, can you explain to the public what the Soros web is?
The Soros web, well, what Soros does in situations like this and situations through the media, through everything, he funds groups and then has them interact with each other. He's really smart in the way that he does it. For example, he has something called the Media Consortium. And it's all these little news outlets, little blogs, little things like this that by themselves don't really have much of a voice. But he paid them hundreds of millions of dollars to form this web called the Media Consortium. And it's a self-proclaimed echo chamber. They bounce ideas back and forth off each other. They publish each other's stories, and they're all in an agreement to do this. And by doing that, by themselves, each one doesn't have that much of a voice, but together they have enough of a voice that those items then work their way up into the mainstream news media.
As we think about what Soros has been able to accomplish, Mike, I believe that, and I'm interested in your take on this, you followed the money, but obviously with the growth in freedom on the internet, even as Soros tries to stack this, gone are the days when you'd have newspapers say, "Oh, this is a watchdog group," and these guys would be able to operate with impunity. Now, at least, conservatives strike back, and I note that you guys at MRC have a Stop Soros campaign.
That's correct. We want to. The way a lot of how Soros's network works is he works behind the scenes. If people know that he's pulling all the strings behind it. There's a lot of people who vote liberal but aren't terrible people, which I would say is probably most of the people who would just go to the polls and vote liberal. If they knew that someone like Soros was behind the scenes in this many things, they'd probably take a second thought before they push that poll button. That's what we're trying to do here.
Mike, is that why your organization calls him the master puppeteer?
Absolutely. He's pulling the strings behind, if not all of the left, but definitely a huge percentage of it.
Mike, I'm just curious, where do you think he's going to go next? You followed the money, almost a combination of forensic accounting and political sleuthing. But if you had to put your money on where Soros is going to spend his big money, where does he pivot off of this Ferguson Black Lives Matter campaign?
I think a lot of what he's focused on now is 2016. He's been very involved, especially in the presidential elections. He spent millions of dollars campaigning against George W. Bush. That didn't work out so well for him, so he took a step back, he recalculated, and now he's back in the game, and he's much, much better at what he's doing.
And with 30 seconds left, Mike, who's he weighing in for? Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton, or just against any future conservative president?
He's actually part of the Ready for Hillary pack, so I'm going to say Hillary Clinton all the way for him.
Yeah, so if he's part of that Ready for Hillary pack, he may be, but I think a lot of us are not. Hey, listen, Mike, we are so grateful. Thanks for Skyping in from the Media Research Center as you take a look at the ledger and the past spending, and you connect the dots on someone who's trying to pull the strings on the left. So we do appreciate Mike Ciandella. Hey, coming back, it's our pal Nick Tate. He's coming in because we talked about this some last week. Now we have the numbers on this flu vaccine that, well, really isn't. Nick Tate, he won't hesitate. He's up next here on America's Forum.